Today, we have with us Blüdnikow. He is a journalist, writer, and reviewer for a national Danish newspaper. He is a historian and former employee of the Danish National Archives, and he is a co-founder of the Society for Danish Jewish History. He has written a lot about this history, and today he will speak about his new book, Unbounded Jews, the game of Denmark and Morocco. And he will tell his story by telling the story of two Jewish family clans, Sumbel and Buzaglo. And of course, we already know the family Buzaglo from a talk by Ali Ergensoy a few years ago. A very interesting family, and the Sumbels are not less interesting. They were adventurous cosmopolitans, merchants, and diplomats. Ben, you can start now.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this society. And maybe it seems a little odd that a guy from Copenhagen is going to tell you, wise men, about the Sephardic Jews. And if you are a little mystified, the explanation comes here, that from 1750 until 40 years later, Denmark and Morocco was very close. We had a trade and peace agreement from 1753. And Denmark had a king, Frederik V, and he sent ships down to Morocco. He sent consuls. There was a lot of trading going on. So in the Danish National Archive, there was a collection, a very big collection of documents telling the situation in Morocco, about Moroccan Jews, about the relationship between Morocco and Denmark. And the thing was that you all know, of course, that this famous British historian, Cecil Roth, wrote about both the family of Sumbel and the family of Buzaglo. But of course, he couldn't use the Danish documents. So when I started with the Danish documents, the consul reports, the captain's reports, all kinds of documents from the authorities and from the king about the situation in Morocco. And as my work grew, I used the National Archives from France and Spain and England and Sweden, and literature from Israel and Germany and other places. And then it ended up as this big book, Unbounded Jews. And I was myself a little astonished by what I discovered and what the document showed, because it was really an incredible story. Of course, I knew from Cecil Roth's writing about these families, but what turned up was much more information. In general, the situation was this, that Sultan Sidi Mohammed bin Abdallah decided in 1750 to open up Morocco towards the European powers. He was more or less in war with Portugal and Spain and England. They had military camps or cities on the Moroccan coastline, and he didn't really want to have anything to do with them, or he was very suspicious of them. But he chose Denmark as a middle big country. We had big trading fleet, but we were not a threat to Morocco. So he decided to open up towards Denmark. But he couldn't really use, as you know, he couldn't use that many of the Muslims, because they didn't have the contacts in Europe, and they didn't have the language ability. So he was more or less forced, or he was willing to use the Jews. And there were a lot of Moroccan Jews coming from Portugal and Spain, coming to Morocco after they were kicked out in 1492. They came to Morocco and all over the world, but they came also to Morocco and became a vital part of the Moroccan Jewish population. And there were some people picked out by the Sultan to be his close advisors, to be diplomats. But the most important guy of all those Jews serving him was Samuel Sumpel. This guy, Samuel Sumpel, there has been written quite a lot about him. Cecil wrote an article called The Forgotten Jewish Statesman. And he was really a statesman. For 30 years, he was Sultan Abdallah's closest advisor. It was him that has the responsibility towards all the diplomatic connections with the European powers. It was him that decided what to do and what not to do, and the Sultan, we know, followed his advice. I know this very closely because in the Danish consul's reports to the Danish king, it's a very, very descriptive, very close description of what was going on in the Sultan's close ranks and what Samuel Sumpel was doing and not doing. So Denmark sent ships to Morocco in 1750. It was actually not Sumpel that was behind these activities. It was Joseph Busaclo. Or Ton, you pronounce it a little bit different, wasn't you? I'm saying Busaclo. You were saying a little bit different. Busaclo?
I said Busaclo, but
Busaclo. I'll keep to
I don't know.
Busaclo then. Busaclo family is just as interesting as the Sumpel family, and Cecil Roth also wrote an article about the Busaclo family. They were 5 sons traveling all over the world, mostly to London and 1 to Palestine. But 3 or 4 brothers settled in London, became a part of the Sephardic community in London, and one of them was Joseph Busaclo. And we know what happened to him from sources from Cecil Roth, and it was a very dramatic fate he got. He traveled first to France, but was caught up with some economic misdemeanor of some kind of crime. He became a galley slave for 10 years in Marseille in the Royal French Navy and had to row his time there for 10 years. Then he got free and traveled to France, to Paris, and became a spy for the English king. And the Frenchmen discovered that he was an English spy and they had a war. So he was sat in the prison of Bastille. Do you pronounce it Bastille? The Bastille, you know, the main prison in Paris. He was there for 1.5 years. We know quite a deal about it because the prisoner documents is kept from the Bastille, and it says there that he was in there. He was first a slave, then he became a prisoner at the Bastille prison, but he had connection with the royal family, and the royal family was kept him free or let him free and tried to go forward. I have to ask my wife. Tried to. They said good for him, and he became a free man there. And then he had a plan. He had a plan of trade with Morocco, and he tried to sell the plan to Prussia and to other countries. But in the last end, it was Denmark that accepted his plan. He came to Denmark in 1750. He talked the king to send a fleet to Morocco, and the king accepted it. And we have all the records about his suggestion, his plan, in the National Archive of Denmark. So the king sent several big ships to Morocco, but there was a major problem, and that was the Sultan, the old Sultan, and the new Crown Prince Abdallah. They had suspicion against all European powers and also against the Danes. They were afraid that they would make some military camp on the coast. So there was a great confrontation. The Sultan took 45 Danish prisoners, and they took the two brothers of Busaclo, Joseph and his brother Abraham, as slaves. And we know that, we know day from day what happened, because there was a Danish slave in Morocco that wrote, after he got home to Denmark, he wrote a diary of some sort, what has happened, and the life of Sumpel and Busaclo is a theme in his writing. So we know a lot of what was going on. And the Sultan threatened the Busaclo brothers of being burned alive. And they only got free by promising first to become Muslims, and then they regretted and became Jews anyway, but was let free. But in all those confrontations, the Sultan decided to send his closest ally, his closest advisor, Samuel Sumpel, to Copenhagen to meet the Danish king and to sort things out and to make some sort of agreement. So the young Sumpel, that was only 26 years old, and I hope you still understand my bad English, not if you still are understanding what I'm saying. Are you understanding me? Yes, more or less.
Yes, that's fine.
Good. The young Samuel Sumpel was only 26 years old, and he traveled from Morocco to Copenhagen. We have close description of his travel, but before reaching Copenhagen, he stopped in Altona. And Altona was a Danish city. Now it's a part of Hamburg, but at that time, Denmark was quite a big country and reached down to Hamburg. And we had a chief rabbi called Jonathan Eibeschuetz. That was the chief rabbi of Hamburg, Altona, and Wandsbek. He was known as the most learned rabbi in the 18th century. There was also a rather polemic guy called Jacob Emden. He was not a rabbi, but recognized as a very learned man. And that became a big confrontation where people accused Jonathan Eibeschuetz of being a Kabbalist. And not even Kabbalist, but also tilhænger, an adherent of Shabtai Tzvi, the false Messiah. It was very serious accusations, and Jacob Emden, that had big respect, joined this debate and accused actually Jonathan Eibeschuetz for being a Kabbalist and maybe also being a supporter of Shabtai Tzvi. So in that confrontation, right in the 1752, Samuel Sumpel arrived in Altona and became a part of the conflict, a part of the confrontation. And we know this from a pamphlet that Jacob Emden published in Wandsbek, a little Danish town, in 1756. And that's what our only knowledge about this confrontation with Sumpel. But he writes that Sumpel is part of the conflict. He has dinner with Eibeschuetz, and they drank and ate, and they had sex with Eibeschuetz's daughter all night. That's what he's writing in this pamphlet. Of course, it was, I guess, false accusations. But the Danish king was he was the responsible king for this area, and it was him that stepped in to make this conflict go away, but it didn't go away. It continued. But Samuel Sumple continued his travel to Copenhagen, reached Copenhagen in the coming weeks, and had a meeting with the Danish king. And the problem between Morocco and Denmark was settled. Sumple traveled back with a Danish ship to Morocco and stayed there. But it was a very dangerous work to work as a diplomat and advisor for the Sultan, because when the Sultan became angry with his people, he threatened them with being burned alive. And we know from the Danish reports and the French reports, there was a French consul that wrote a lot about these issues, that Sumple was threatened to be burned alive 5 times. He had to buy himself free. And the Jewish community, Sumple was the Nagid, the leader of the Jewish communities in Morocco. They had to collect money to buy him free. And in the last end, Samuel Sumple was very tired of being threatened with being burned alive. So he made a deal with the Danish consul. He bought royal Danish bonds in all secrecy. The Sultan didn't know about it, of course. If he knew about it, Samuel Sumple would have been burnt alive. So he bought these bonds in the middle of the night. The consul with his Jewish waiter gave him the paper bonds, and Sumple gave them the money. So in the Danish National Archive, we have a long list and protocols about all the money that Samuel Sumple gave to Denmark and had these paper bonds instead. So in the last end, he died, Samuel Sumple, in 1782 in Tangier. And the rumor was that the Sultan had given him poison. But from the reports of the Danish consuls, my guess is that he wasn't poisoned. He got some bad medicine from a doctor or quack. And he had 4 children. I hope this is so. If you have a question, we can take him now or later. What do you say, David? Should I just keep on talking?
Please continue, and we'll have questions.
I hope you all follow me. So he died in 1782, and the 4 children was actually aware of all his money in the Danish bank, national bank. So the oldest son, a guy called Joseph Sumple, was living in Paris, and he came to Copenhagen in 1785, dressed in Moroccan dress with a turban and with a saber, with a sword, with jewelry on it. And the Danish population in Copenhagen haven't seen anything like it, and it made an uproar. And this Joseph Sumple was a very interesting guy. He was a young guy, 20 years old. He went to the brothel, we know, in Copenhagen. He went to the Jewish synagogue and made an uproar because he wanted them to have a ceremony as he was used to after the Sephardic rituals. But they were mostly Ashkenazi Jews, so there was a lot of problems with that. But then he got a message from God. The message was that he was to create a new religion. This new religion should be a religion of tolerance. He would give up to go to the brothel. He would preach to the heathen, to the Muslim, to the Jews, to the Christian, that they were all welcome in his new religion. And he spoke to everybody in town about his new religion. He printed the 10 Commandments in a pamphlet, and people talked a lot about him. And at Shavuot, the Jewish holiday, he went to a park in the middle of Copenhagen with 2 soldiers, a waiter, and his new Bible. And in this park, he proclaimed his new religion. And it was, people were really amazed at this, because it was, of course, a very Christian society. They never heard of a new religion open for everybody. And the local Jews viewed him as a heretic. So they chased him out of town, and the Danish authority gave him a passport to Morocco, and you would guess that he would travel to Morocco, but there he fooled you. He went to London. And there in London, with all his father's money, he was imprisoned in Fleet Street prison because his 3 sisters and brothers wanted part of the fortune. And they had asked the British authorities to imprison him in Fleet Street prison. And there he came walking into the prison in his Moroccan clothes, still with his turban and his sword and everything. And in this prison sat the hottest actress in London at the time, a girl called Mary Wells. She was playing Shakespeare, she was playing everything. She was one of the best known actresses in London. And she was there because she couldn't give back the money for a loan she had. And they fell in love immediately. And they had a big wedding in the prison with all the prisoners attending this prison. And it was a wedding after Moroccan rituals. We know all about it because the newspapers in London was writing about everything. He was very jealous. She called him Jewish Othello. He tried to murder her at some time because of jealousy. He also tried to kidnap her to Morocco, but she discovered his intention and fled. And after some years, and she converted to Judaism, she called herself Leah Sumple and not Mary Wells. It was very unusual. You should remember, of course, that Jews were looked down on, but she converted. And then they had, of course, their divorce. And the British newspaper was writing about it, and there were accusations back and forth. And it's very funny to read about it today. And she printed her memoirs. And in her well-known memoirs, she was a very interesting woman, kind of a modern woman that did what she wanted. She had 3 marriages before Joseph Sample, but that didn't really matter for her. And in this memoir, she wrote a lot about Joseph Sample and described him as an awful guy, very jealous, but it shined through that she was still in love with him. He was a handsome guy, she writes, and if he wanted to come back, she more or less said, yes, he was welcome. So he must have been a very kind of lover boy. And then he traveled back to Altona, where the Danish king was still the king, and he had his great fortune with him. He had a house and a street named after his father. And Mary Wells, the example, writes in her memoirs that he became very disappointed with life. In his big house, he had fish in a pool, and when he couldn't catch the fish, he would empty the pool for all the water and kill the fish with a hammer. So he was not a happy man. He died in 1804 and left a great fortune. And for 50 years, his sisters and brothers fought about this fortune, and there are 10,000 documents in the archive of Schleswig-Holstein in northern Germany, describing this giant testament and the fight for the money. One of his brothers was called Salomon, and this guy Salomon settled in Copenhagen, and he died in 1831. And he left no one. He was not married. He didn't have children. So he left his part of the fortune to the Jewish community in Copenhagen and to the miller in Marrakesh, where he came from. And he had a big, big gravestone. It weighed half a ton. And he asked the Jewish community that they were obliged to keep this stone in water. What do you call it? Water. It was kind of, they should keep it in the right place, this great marble stone. And on his death date, there should come 10 learned and Jewish men and say Kaddish, say prayer over him. Me and the Chief Rabbi Bent Lexner in Copenhagen, we work together, and we haven't, or the community haven't seen any learned religious men for ages at the old Jewish cemetery where he is lying. Our Jewish cemetery is from 1694. It's a great place. It's a marvelous place, a magic place, and his marble stone is the biggest one in the cemetery. So last year we decided, the Jewish community, Chief Rabbi Bent Lexner and me, we decided to have his old letters refreshed. And in those letters, it says that I'm the son of Samuel Sumpel, I'm lying here, and so on and so forth. And the chief rabbi said the Kaddish over him. So we kept somehow the promise we made to him many years ago. So that's part of it. But I have to say that the Sumpel family is very interesting. But the Busaclo family is maybe even more fantastic in the adventurous lives. This guy, Joseph Sumpel, was threatened with being burned alive in Morocco, yes, but he became an advisor to Sultan Abdallah afterwards. We know that from a lot of documents he wrote that is in the National Archive of France. And he came to Copenhagen in 1759, and there he suggested to the French authorities to conquer Morocco, liquidate the Sultan, and became the new ruler of Morocco. It's not only from the documents in the French National Archive, but older French historians actually knew this and wrote about it. There's a guy called Paul Masson that was the head of the foreign ministry, and he wrote a book about the French policy towards Northern Africa, and he actually had 4 pages on this Joseph Busaclo suggestion to conquer Morocco. But in the end, the French authority didn't accept the plan, and Joseph Busaclo and his brother Abraham moved on, became rich, had 3 ships, and sailed to the West Indies with gunpowder, maybe with slaves also. I'm not sure. I debated in my book. And Joseph Busaclo died out there. I have to say that Joan helped me very much, and Ali also helped me a lot about this part of my book, and I'm very grateful to you, because the women played a major role in a lot of these stories. They were not passive. They didn't just accept their faith. And Joseph Busaclo was married first one time, and then he got another wife. And this wife, Bentubo, as far as I remember, was her name. She was living in Morocco, but came with her to Copenhagen, and later on also to Amsterdam, as far as I remember. And there was another women's story, because one of the brothers were called Shalom Busaklo, and this Shalom Busaklo was part of the Sephardic community in London, and he was a very well-known Kabbalist, and he has written a big book about the Zohar, that is a main book about Kabbalism. So he was a well-known guy, and he was also married to a woman that he treated very badly, and she had a divorce from him, and there's a whole lot activity there. And Tone, as far as I remember, Tone, you could tell me that this woman is buried in the Jewish cemetery in Hague. Is that correct, remembered?
That's correct.
Thank you.
1927, I believe.
It's a fantastic story and fantastic women. There's more about these women acting very independently in the 18th century, and that came as a surprise for me, because I thought that women just did what their husband asked them to do, but that's not the actual case. They were also very independent. So Joseph Busaklo died in a little island in St. Eustatius in the Caribbean. And his stone is not there anymore, but there's a picture of him, a picture of the stone, because it was photographed sometime in the 50s. And I'm grateful for Ali for helping me with a lot of these stories. So Joseph Busaklo died out there, but his brother Abraham was a very inventious guy. He was an inventor. We can see that he invented a lot of things, and he's well known in the 18th century for inventing an oven for heating up rooms. It was called simply a Busaklo. And the royal family bought a Busaklo, and Benjamin Franklin had a Busaklo, and the only problem was it wasn't that efficiency. It wasn't that good at heating up the rooms, and the rooms became very smoky, a lot of smokes. So it wasn't that good an idea. But then this Abraham Busaklo was an inventor, and he decided to become a doctor or a quack, and he became a sports doctor. He said that he could cure all kinds of arthritis. Is that the gout? Gout. That's the right word. He could cure all kinds of gout with sports, and he invented actually machines so people could make sports activities in different kind of machines. He was our world first fitness instructor. It's kind of fantastic. And he even asked Frederik the Great in Prussia that had the gout if he wanted to use his machines and methods. But Frederik the Great wrote back that he didn't want to. There's a letter actually from Frederik the Great on this issue. So the families of Sample and of Busaklo was fantastic people. They point to a new area, a more modern area. And you have a great historian in Great Britain called Todd Entelman. He wrote a great book called Leaving the Jewish Fold. And he describes all these kinds of people that are leaving the Jewish fold. And he has a chapter where he describes Joseph Sample that created this new religion. And Entelman writes in his great book that Joseph Sample actually was a very important guy that pointed towards a new area, a modern Jewish area. And it's something that a well-known Jewish historian from Israel, Shmuel Feiner, he has written two big books on the Jewish history of the 18th century. And he names also this guy, Joseph Sample, as a guy that is pointing to a new area, a more modern area with a new kind of feeling for religion and trying to open up to create a universal religion that we saw later on in the 19th century in different form. It could be a Marxist kind of religion or other kinds of religion, but both Feiner and Engelmann actually points to this Joseph Sample. But in Denmark, these people are not well known. Actually, they are forgotten because we lost all of those southern Danish cities, Altona, Glückstadt, Vansbæk. We lost them when we had a war with Germany in 1864. The German, unfortunately, won the war and conquered that part of Denmark. So it was lost for Danish history in many ways. And the Busaklo people, when they were mentioned in some small articles, they were only mentioned as greedy types that cheated the Danes. So they were written out of Danish history, and you can say that my main mission, besides writing about these fantastic people with their fantastic lives, is to put Danish Jewish history into a broader tale, a broader history of the European and Moroccan Jewish history in the 18th century, because Danish Jewish history was part of that general history. But in Denmark, we forgot it, and these fantastic people were written out of our history, and they are some of the most fantastic persons we got in Danish history. So my mission, my book is coming out both in English and Danish, and my hope is that make the Danish population aware of these fantastic people and make Danish Jewish history a central part of the general history of Denmark and of Europe. And there I almost ended the story.
Thank you. That was absolutely incredible. Before we have questions, can I just share, because I found an image of a Busaglo stove.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what it looks like. I think there's a sort of German stove that looks sort of similar, but that's very, very interesting. I never heard of that before, and of course this is Bent's book, which everyone I'm sure will be reading. Can I first of all, before we throw it out, after such a colorful story, can I ask a very prosaic question? What is it that the Danes and the Moroccans would have been trading? Do you know?
Well, the Morocco sold wheat, among other things, to the European powers, and I think wheat was a part of it, and also sheep, meat from sheep, and things like that. Saltpeter, is that a word in English? Saltpeter?
Yes, yes.
I think they sold saltpeter also. What the Sultan wanted primary was guns and cannons. He wasn't really interested in so much other things because he was at war all the time. He wanted to kick out the Portugal and Spain and France from their military camps on the coast. He succeeded with the Portuguese. They won a war against a camp called Masagan, but they were defeated by the Spains and France. So it was very important for the Sultan to get cannons and to get ammunition, because he was also at war with his sons that make uproar all the time. He was at war sometimes with his black army. He had a big army with black soldiers, and they revolted at times, and he had to cross it, beat it down. So he needed guns and cannons all the time. So he asked Denmark for guns, and if he couldn't get it from Denmark, he would ask Holland, the Netherlands, or Sweden, and they would gladly give him as many guns and cannons as he wanted. So there was also internally in Europe concurrence. What do you call it? Concurrence. A fight for making good trades and deals with Morocco by giving them gifts and giving them cannons. And we know exactly how many gifts the Sultan and his brothers was given by the Danes, because we have a list of all the gifts they gave. And they gave also big money to Samuel Sample to have the meetings with the Sultan. Sample was the one that had to say yes, and he had to ask money for this. Actually, we know quite a deal about Samuel Sample, because when the chief rabbi of Morocco, Obadiah, went from Morocco in 1947 or 8, he went to Israel with his archive. And in this archive, there were documents about Samuel Sample and the Moroccan communities in the 18th century. And from there, we know quite a deal of what kind of guy he was. And he was a kind of brutal guy when it came to rich Moroccan Jews. But when it came to poor Jews in Morocco, he was actually, the document shows, and there has been written an article about it by an Israeli historian, he was quite mild and didn't want to press them for money. So he had two faces, so to speak. I have to mention one thing that is a very sensational thing in my book, and I didn't mention it, and that is that the Sultan in 1777 suggested to the European powers to abolish slavery, and it was Sample that was put forward to abolish slavery. The motivation for the Sultan to do this was that he wanted to free all Muslim slaves. And to do this, he suggested to the European powers that they should together abolish slavery and all should be free. It sounds crazy at that time because slavery wasn't abolished for the next 40 years or so, but it was, I think, very serious meant from the Sultan and Sample's side. They really wanted to do something, and the Sultan really wanted to free the Muslim slave. He saw it as a religious demand, so to speak. So there's a Muslim historian called Nabil Matar that has written about this. I'm not the first, but it's not mentioned in the literature in Europe. So I'm the first in Denmark that has mentioned this, and the Danish king didn't accept the suggestion and didn't want to recognize that this was serious meant. And the same was also for the French king. He didn't want to debate it and didn't support it. So there came nothing out of it, but it's really something that the Sultan and Sample really meant this suggestion in a serious way.
Thank you. Ton?
If I may ask, how long have you been thinking about writing this book? How long did you work on it?
For 4 years. I started because I discovered that this Joseph Sample with his new religion was mentioned in a few articles in Denmark. And I was writing an article, some articles to my newspapers My newspaper is called Berlingske. It's an old conservative newspaper in Copenhagen. And I was writing a series of articles about prophets. And I was writing about Shabtai Tzvi and about Jakob Frank, the Polish prophet. And I was writing then about Joseph Sompel. And then I discovered that actually there was documents in the National Archive. I've been working for 10 years at the National Archive. And by accident, I discovered there were documents at the National Archives about him and his brothers and his father. And I dug into it and discovered more and more archives. And you know how things are. You have all of you worked with history and documents, and it's like a detective story. You start somewhere and you discover what the hell, there's more to it that I thought, and you get hold of more documents and more archives and more literature. And I discovered there was a lot in the English National Archive and in the French National Archive. You can use the computer now. Cecil Roth didn't have that opportunity when he wrote 60 years ago, but now you can do it. And suddenly I had the manuscript, and I went to my publisher and I said, well, print it both in English and Danish, because I think there must be some strange people out there that are interested in Sephardic history. Can you imagine that? And my publisher said, yes, we can print it, but we need a lot of money. And I went to both private and funds, and they gave me a lot of money. So my publisher said yes, and there it is, both in English and Danish. And tomorrow I have a big book reception at the Danish Jewish Museum, and you are all invited if you can catch a plane. So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, Bruce, you have your hand up.
Well, this is made for Hollywood, and I mean that in an authentic way. Yeah, I mean, you're an amazing storyteller, but I do wonder, especially given some stuff I did with Apple TV, when we're going to be able to get you in front of a producer, or have you already figured that out?
No. I just wanted to publish the books and didn't think of any film or documentary, but I hope very much. And I don't think it should be in Denmark. I think it should be in London or New York, that someone would say, these people, and they, it's not necessary to use my book. You could use Cecil Roth's articles, or use the primary sources yourself. It's so amazing a story, and I really don't give a damn if it's the Viking time or 18th century or our present time. The real thing is that these living people, these amazing people, men and women, was having so amazing lives that it tells us something today. So I hope that some filmmaker will turn up and say, well, this is the right stuff to a documentary or a film, and I'll
So I've sent you my
email.
I've sent you my email if you want to pursue it. But the other thing, and I'm sorry, Bernard and Allie, just real quick, your passion is, it seems, that there are these really untold stories, and that they were deliberately untold, or vanquished, whitewashed.
You could say
as a journalist, what is that story aside from this story?
You are. It's a really good question, because the thing is that I'm a quite well-known journalist and historian in Denmark, and I've been debating Danish Jewish history for a long time. And in Denmark, you know, the Danish Jews, and my parents were saved in 43 by fleeing to Sweden. It's a well-known story. All Americans know this story. But the thing is that the Danish government and population cooperated with the Nazis for a very long time. And the Danish historians kind of excused this cooperation by pointing to the rescue of the Danish Jews in 1943. And then I was coming, when I was young and wanted to debate those things, I was coming and saying that you can't write this story from a narrow Danish viewpoint. You have to write a broader story, because when Denmark cooperated with the Nazis, okay, they saved the Danish Jews, but what about the Jews outside the Danish borders? We prolonged the war by sending a lot of agricultural products to Nazi Germany. We strengthened the Nazi government. What about the Jews, the Russian prisoners of wars and freedom fighters that died in concentration camps because of the cooperation with the Danish population and authorities? And I became partly very unpopular by saying this, because the Danes wanted the good story. So that has been my viewpoint from the start, that we have to write a broad international story about the Danish history. And it's not only the Holocaust and 1943 rescue, it's also the 18th century. We can't just write Danish Jewish history very narrowly, because Denmark and the Danish Jews were very mobile population. They traveled from Germany to Altona, to London, to Copenhagen, all over the place, from Morocco to London. And you can't write about Danish Jewish history without that international perspective. And that is my mission with this book, also to say to the Danish readers and critics that the really fantastic history of Danish Jewish history is not a narrow history about Danish Jews living in Copenhagen or things like that. It's a broad international history about Morocco and the Sephardic communities in Altona and in London. And that is the amazing thing and the fantastic thing. And I'm trying to bring these colorful people into the mainstream of Danish Jewish history, so to speak. This is not a commercial for my book, I have to stress. I'm just telling my motivation. I know it sounds like a commercial.
Bernard, can you keep it short?
Herbert, jeg vil gerne takke dig for din imponerende tale, som var både fascinerende og inspirerende, og ønske dig tillykke med din nye bog. And having said that, I want to say how excited I was by hearing that you've documented some of these absolutely fantastic stories, because I've been working for several years on my Scandinavian Sephardic ancestors, starting a century earlier. I was just looking I had no idea he had ended up in Denmark with Benjamin Musafia, who ended up as doctor to the king, and then discovered his son-in-law Gabriel Milan, who ended up as governor of the Danish West Indies, and then discovered waves of Sephardic ancestors who immigrated from Hamburg, the Meldelers, and so on. The Meldelers, I understand from Eric Henriques, being completely unknown until he rediscovered them, thanks to somebody in Sweden writing to the Jewish community in Copenhagen. So there are hundreds of stories, but what I'm excited about is the ones that sound the most unlikely are absolutely true, and some of the stories that I've been reading I thought couldn't possibly be true. I'm hoping to come to Denmark in the next couple of months and would love to meet you, would love to spend a little time with you showing me around the National archives, if that's possible.
Yes, it would be great. And I hope you will write to me. You can get my mail address from Ton and Ali, and I'll answer you immediately.
Thank you.
I have to add that I got a mail a few weeks ago from a young Jewish historian student that wanted to write a thesis about Musaphia.
Yeah.
So I'll also give you his contact. And you're Danish. Are you speaking Danish?
I speak Danish.
That's
And if I
fantastic.
come to Denmark and you know anybody who would like a talk about the work I've been doing, I'm happy to give one in Danish.
That's great. That's great. I'm looking forward to it, and you'll write to me, and I'll answer you immediately. As
Absolutely.
Tone knows, I'm quick to answer back. So that would be great, and I'm looking forward to meet you. So it will be great.
Thank you. I look forward to it too.
And I have to add that you are very right that some stories are not true. Some stories, some fantastic stories are true. And I have in my book 920 scientific notes. And that is necessary because if you haven't, if you can't document these things, these stories, people would think that you have stolen the whole thing from a fantasy novel. So it's simply necessary to be scientific in these questions.
Thank you. Ali.
Yeah, hi Bent.
Hi.
Very nice to see you again. First of all, I want to congratulate you on the publication of your book and the event tomorrow. I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting and great event. And you were very kind to send me a copy, which I've been reading. I have to confess, I haven't finished it yet. It's 400 pages. And to everybody out there, I should say, if you can get your hands on this, it would be really good because, it's very closely written, very well footnoted, documented, and an absolutely fascinating read. I kind of zipped through 100 pages very quickly. A couple of things I want to make points about. One of them is, to me, the sort of really interesting thing was how these two personalities, or the families, the Buzaglos and the Sumbals, kind of lived at the junction of kind of traditionalism and modernity in the Jewish community in Europe, in Northern Europe at the time, and how it kind of fits in with people like Moses Mendelssohn and the Haskalah movement, and
Absolutely.
so it's a fascinating period. I mean, they're very fascinating people,
Yes.
and their stories are fascinating, but they're living in a fascinating time as well, where all these tensions are taking place within the Jewish communities. My question, and I don't know whether you'll be able to answer this, is I've been corresponding in the last couple of weeks with a gentleman called James Emerson, who I was hoping was going to be in the meeting today, but I can't see his name here. But he says he's a descendant of the Buzaglos, and that his fourth great-grandfather was John Johannan Buzaglo, date of birth unknown, sometime between 1750 and 1770. But that he was, various descendants and researchers claim that he was educated in Denmark, and that he ended up in England, where he married out of the Jewish faith and was cut off from his family. But he worked as a foreign clerk, like a translator in Manchester and Birmingham, and eventually settled in a little town in Hertfordshire, where his wife came from. But he married this woman in 1797. But, James was saying that he can only think that Johannan would have been a descendant of Joseph Buzaglo? Because, you know, as far as we know, there weren't any other Buzaglos that were active in Denmark or lived in
Yes.
Denmark.
But
But perhaps, I don't know whether this is true.
I got the mail from Mr. Emerson and tried to answer him, but I couldn't pinpoint his relationship. But there was actually one Buzaglo in Denmark, because the oldest of the brothers was called Jacob Buzaglo.
Yeah.
He was a tradesman, and he had a son, Elias Buzaglo, and he went into trade with him by selling soldiers to the English army in India. They were recruiting soldiers, and I got that from an English historian writing about the English war, the war in India. And they went to Europe recruiting German soldiers to the English army in India. And I know, yes, it's crazy times, but I know that this Elias Buzaglo and his father, Jacob Buzaglo, was in this recruiting trade. And Elias later went to Copenhagen, I know this from a newspaper, and worked as a translator. People that wanted to learn English could go to him and learn English, and he would translate things. He stayed in Copenhagen for a few years and then went back to London and became a notaria. Is that a word in English, notary?
Yes, notary.
We know that from an article in the Jewish Historical Society. They had a lot of articles, and there's an article mentioning him as a notaria. So I know this Elias Buzaglo, but I couldn't pinpoint Emerson's information in any way. So I couldn't help him 100%.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I hadn't realized that he'd already been in touch with you. So yeah, I thought I'd ask the question, but congratulations again.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you for your great help.
No problem.
I have a question. Have you been to Morocco, and have you visited archives there?
Actually, because of this study, my dear wife, Ira, that maybe should be in the picture so you can see her, because without her, I couldn't have written the book. She translated all the French things and supported me in any ways, also economically. And we went together to Morocco this year, and we saw 3 or 4 of the king's cities, and it was a great experience. We were in Marrakesh, in Fez, in
I don't know.
4th king's cities, but we didn't go to Mogador, called Essaouira now. Essaouira is quite south in Morocco, and we didn't have the time to go there. And that's a bad thing, because Mogador was actually was established as the first modern Moroccan harbor city. It was Sultan Abdallah's ambition to make a modern harbor there, and he put Sumbel and some other Jewish merchants to be responsible for the creation of this modern harbor. We know that there's an American Jewish historian called Daniel Schroeder that has written about the Moroccan Jews in the 18th, 19th century, and she has a description of what was going on, a splendid book. And I can also document that Sumbel and his friends were the one that created Mogador as a modern harbor that could be used by the European powers. So it's a very interesting city, and there's the Danish consul house in Mogador, Essaouira, is now being renovated by the Moroccan state and is going to be a cultural house. and I'm looking forward to see what is going on there, because it would stress the points I made in the book about the Moroccan Jews and the connection to Denmark.
Thank you. Alain.
Hello. Thank you very much for this very nice explanation and history of the Buzaglo in Denmark. It happens that a very close friend of mine gave me a tree of her Buzaglo family that goes back many, many years. I mean, and the first one is a Joseph going back, I have no idea what time. I have about 64 of them. Do you have in your book any genealogy information about that family?
I'm trying to go back, but it's not my research. I'm just leaning on the research that others have done about the ancestry of Moroccan Jews and the first sample families settling in Morocco. So it's information you can find other places more detailed than I'm doing. And I'm also writing a little bit about the Buzaglo family and their oldest history, but it's not my research. I'm only copying from other authors.
Okay, no, I just want to, I know that Lydia Collins in London had the Buzaglo in her book, but I don't have the book with me here. But if you want that genealogy, I can send it to you. So maybe
it
you
would
can
be
have...
wonderful. It would be wonderful. I would like to see it.
It is on the website. It is on my website, farhi.org.
Okay, could you get my mail address also from Tone or Ali, and I'll would be very pleased to receive your mail.
Okay.
And answer back.
Okay. Well, David, you have something to do.
Okay.
Well, there are no questions in chat, but Joel says, great program.
Can you read this?
Let me write it down. Hold on.
I'll send it to you, Alain.
Okay. Thank you.
David Silvera says, great story, well told. Looking forward to the book and the movie, as we are all looking forward to the book and the movie.
Thank you very much,
Ali
Tom,
can write a
thank
film
you
script.
for your great help. Okay.
I think, yeah, thank you. I think even by the exceptional standards of Sephardic stories, that was really quite remarkable, and I think a lot of information that none of us knew. So thank you very much, and I'm sure everyone is looking forward to reading your book. It really was an exceptionally good talk. Thank you.
I'm happy you invited me, and I am happy that people are interested in these fantastic lives. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Ton, would you like to close the meeting?
Yes. This was Sephardic World, brought to you by the Sephardic Genealogical Society. As always, we thank our patrons who are with us here and who make these meetings possible through their generous support. And this meeting shall be available for renewed viewing on the next Sunday through our YouTube channel. And we hope to see you all in 2 weeks' time. And above all, many thanks to Bent, who told a lively story. We loved it. And congratulations on your book, and have a great day tomorrow. Thank you all, and good evening.
Good evening.